doing this evening, young adults? Are we doing well? Good. I'm so glad. Hey, on your way in, you hopefully received a card. It's about a 4x4 card. It says Summer Kickoff on it. If you have it, could you raise it in the air? Who's read it yet? Have you read it? Have you digested the information? Okay. Next week is a week that you do not want to miss. It's only one time a year, and it's called Summer Kickoff. We are going to have such a fun time. We're going to have a normal service inside, and then once we get after service, man, it's going to be a party. We have a carnival ride. We got a 50-foot cyclone swing from the state fair coming. You're going to want to ride that. It's not sketch, I promise. Like, it's all good. We got everything certified. It's all great. We're going to have a movie on the lawn, free food, caricatures, popcorn, cotton candy. List goes on. It's going to be awesome. And I think if I heard right, we're going to be watching The Sandlot, which is going to be pretty rad. So don't miss next week. But that card for you is not for you. That card is to give to someone else. So look at it, digest the information, and then give it to someone else. We good? Awesome. Hey, I get the awesome privilege tonight to speak and continue our series on Exodus. And if we've never met, my name is Hunter, and I'm super, super excited about this passage in particular because I really believe that every single one of us walks through life with just a little bit of fear. I think every single one of us has something that we go through or something that we are currently going through that makes us have a little bit of fear. You might not be like that person that you know that's like so afraid all the time, or that person who you're like, they're like the Rock, and it's like, how could they ever be afraid? And it's like, but we all carry some kind of fear. In Exodus chapter 14 today, we're going to see the group of Israelite people. They're going to be pretty afraid. They've just been delivered, but they're going to hit a point to where they literally don't think they're going to have much longer to live. So as you open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 14, let me pray, and then let's dive in. Lord, we love you. I thank you so much just for this time. God, I ask that we would just be able to sit in this moment and really get to understand what you really want us to do with our fears. God, you want us to give them to you. God, I ask that throughout tonight you would speak clearly and that we would get something out of this to change our life. We love you and thank you. Amen. When I was little, I played T-ball. Did anyone else play T-ball? Anybody else? T-ball for me was like a super awesome sport because when I was 3, I got to play with my cousin Mackenzie, and yes, it was a girl. She's the girl. But T-ball is like, it's like so cool. When you're little, you just like play with everybody. Your dad can be your coach, and then you get trauma from it, and it's great. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I used to play T-ball. I want to show you some pictures. I have the picture of this just cute little guy in a yellow shirt. Let me see if it's up there. Look at this guy. Look how cute he is. I got another one in a gray shirt. I came with all the pictures tonight, all right? He's like, I'm like 3 years old there. I got another one, like 5, 6 years old. And if you can tell, I was a prodigy. If the baseball bat is a foot underneath the ball, I'm probably going places, right? So I played T-ball. And I don't know about you, but baseball necessarily isn't the most entertaining sport to watch. But I think one of the cool parts about baseball is if you hit the ball really well, at least for guys, chicks dig the long ball. And when I was playing T-ball, I didn't really care about the fielding part of it, but I really cared about the hitting. When I'd hit the ball, it'd roll like 10 feet, and it was like the greatest thing of all time. And I would run to first, I'd be safe, and it was like the most anticlimactic moment of my life. It rolls off the tee, and you get to first, and my parents are cheering, and it's just like, bro, why are you celebrating? One of the parts about T-ball, though, I didn't necessarily like was the fielding part. I more so liked the daisies that were at shortstop. Like, that, for me, was the fun part. But I remember one time when we were at practice, and we were going through all these drills. If you played T-ball before, they try to, like, kidify it for you, and they're like, hey, when you get down to field the ball, it's like an alligator. Like you put one jaw down and one jaw on the top, and you like alligator close it. And so we're going through drills, and my coach is hitting me the ball, and I'm like I think I'm doing a decent job, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, alligator, alligator, alligator. And I keep getting the ball, I keep throwing it to one of the dads, and then I get up one of the next times, and my coach, he hits it really fast. But like I said, when you have your dad as your coach, he wants you to do really well. If you've ever been in that scenario, and when a parent is your coach, they coach you a little bit harder. And they want you to do super well. So when I would get up to field, my dad would just crank the baseball a little bit faster at me. So at this specific time, I come up, and I'm like, all right, I've been doing pretty good. So I was like 5 or 6 years old. It's one of my first memories ever. And the ball's coming at me, and I'm like getting down on my stance, but it's like fast. Like I'm like, no way. I'm like, I'm gonna get this, and then I like jump out of the way. I'm like, no, nah, fam. Like I know what happens if I get hit with a baseball, and the girls that are watching don't need to see that, okay? I'm a cool kid. I had Riz at 6 years old, okay? I didn't need the girls to see that. So I jumped out of the way. And my coach, remember, is also my father. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, you're trying to kill me. I'm going to get out of the way. And he's like, no, you can't move. We're playing baseball, bro. There's no crying in baseball, okay? So do it again. And like before I could even argue, he's already like going back for another turn. He hits the ball again, and I swear it was faster than the first time. So I'm down, and I'm like, no, and I jumped out of the way again. Because why in the world would I want to field that? And then my dad does something where my dad wasn't usually the most patient man. And which makes me not the most patient man either. But my dad, he put the bat down, and he walked over to me, and he kind of just like got on one knee, and he was like, hey, why do you keep jumping out of the way? And I'm like, again, Dad, you're trying to kill me. I don't want you to do this. Like, I'm scared. And my dad hugged me. In the middle of practice, I was like, Dad, stop. I'm embarrassed. What are you doing? But he hugged me, and then he looked at me again, and he's like, Hunter, why would I ever try to hurt you? He's like, I'm only hitting the ball at you so that you would actually be able to field it. I'm only hitting the ball at you this hard so that you can actually be able to field any ball that comes at you. And what my dad told me in that moment is something that I resonated with as I was reading the verses in the text today, is that sometimes in life, we're going to have things that are going to come at us in ways that we think are way too fast, way too hard, way too strong, and all we're going to try to do is get out of the way. But what we need is our Father to tell us, hey, you're okay. I'm not trying to hurt you. You're going to get through this. So if you would open up to Exodus chapter 14. The thing that we're going to see today, overarching everything else, is this big idea. It's that trust God's faithfulness, not your fear. I was so stuck in just seeing the ball that I couldn't see really past the idea that, well, if I actually caught it, I could probably get a lot better at the game and be able to catch any ball that came at me. I was stuck in my fear. And tonight what we're going to see is if we trust God's faithfulness, not our fear, there's a life out there for us that is beyond our wildest dreams. So let's dive into the story a bit tonight. In Exodus, we've tracked through all the way from the very beginning of Exodus now to chapter 14. We've seen God send plagues, we've seen God send Moses and Aaron, and awesome things have happened. But what happened at this moment is Pharaoh has had enough. Go back and read some of the rest of the context to it, but Pharaoh's had enough. He's finally said, okay, Israelites, leave. Get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. Take everything you have, all women and children, and leave. So approximately around 2 million people from Israel leave Egypt. That's a pretty big exit of people. So they're leaving Egypt, and I can just imagine how excited they are, and they're headed down this path. And in chapter 13, it tells us that they're going to the land that God has promised for them, but he actually takes them a different way. If you were to plan this for yourself, and I don't know, maybe you've played like Chutes and Ladders before, this is like one of those, it's like you're getting close to winning, and then you draw the wrong card, and it's like a chute, like slide all the way back down to the beginning. It's like, why are we taking this? God takes them like, if you were trying to go to Phoenix, he like takes you all the way through Queen Tucky and Florence, and then all the way up. It didn't make a lot of sense. But they end up on a shore right in front of some water. And the people are like confused. They're like, why are we here? But God knew that if they went down the straight route, they were going to hit Egyptian forces and Philistine forces, and they were actually going to have to fight. They were going to get into some battles. So God knew in foresight where they were going to go, and I'm thankful, and I don't know if you are, that God actually sees things differently than we do. That sometimes we're going to try to go down a certain path, and God's like, nah, man, that's going to lead to destruction. But if you follow me and go down a path that doesn't make sense, it's going to lead to blessing. But the people of Israel are going to have something kind of rile up their story. You see, the entire story has culminated to this moment. Pharaoh hears that they didn't take the regular route, they took the other route. And he's like, wait, they're stuck on a shore, on a beach near the water, and they can't go anywhere? Look what he does in verse 5 of chapter 14. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done, letting all of those Israelite slaves get away? They asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egyptians' best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt, each with its commander. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, which just means strengthened it in a decision Pharaoh already made, the king of Egypt, so he chased after the people of Israel, who had left them with fists raised in defiance. So if you hear that the people that left you in defiance are stuck, you're going to go after them. In verse 9 it says, the Egyptians chased after them with all the forces in Pharaoh's army. All of them. All his horses and chariots, his charioteers, and his troops. The Egyptians caught up with the people of Israel as they were camped beside the shore near, I'm not saying that name, across from Baal-Zephon. I'm not going to do it. If anybody else knows it, just let me know. But Pharaoh wastes no time. He hears, okay, they're stuck, I'm going for them. And he books it. He books it all the way there. And look what happens in verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to God. And I want you to really key in on what they say to Moses and the Lord here. Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. Key in on this last one. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. I think for people here, we're reading this now, and it's like, why are they freaking out? Like, don't they know they're going to get saved here in a little bit? No, they don't. They don't know they're about to get saved. I think they get a really bad rap. Because, for a second, let me contextualize this. Imagine that you are one of the Israelite people. 4 generations of your grandparents have been slaves. Every family member that you know and see and friends have been slaves under another empire, and now you're free. So I'm gonna think about this as like a young Israeli man. I'm led out of Egypt. I have my wife. I have my kids. I've got my family, and I'm finally walking out. And man, we've been walking all day, and God took us down this weird path, and I'm like, why are we walking through the wilderness? I don't really know, but we ended up at this spot near the water, and honestly, it was kind of nice. I was able to sit down and chat and just talk and be like, man, we're finally here. Like the day that Joseph said would come, the day that Moses said would come, man, we're finally here. We get to enjoy the freedom. We get to enjoy everything we've looked forward to. And don't you think a little bit of peace would set over you? Feeling like, wow, we finally made it. And then as you're talking to your friends, you hear this low rumbling behind you. And it starts getting louder and louder and louder. And as you're around these campfires, like it's almost like a Jurassic Park scene, I think. You see the T-Rex coming and the water's just bouncing. Because you hear the wheels turning, and you hear the horses bleating, and you hear people screaming and yelling. And it gets to this point where it's so deafening that you're sitting at the shore and you look at the hill, and over the hill comes Pharaoh, his chariot, and everyone else piling down at you, and you have nowhere to go. That's why everyone freaks out. Like, where else can we go? I can imagine they start flipping their tables, they start running to their family, and it's not just a small group of them like us. Like 2 million people are getting attacked, and they thought they were free. They thought they were free of it. They didn't think this was going to happen again. And I wonder how many of us sometimes think about our situations or are in situations where, man, we feel like we finally got out of something and now it's back. Or I feel like, man, I'm struggling with something and now it's back in my life and I can't feel like I get over it. Or like you just got out of a storm and another one's here and you just can't seem to get out. Well, what do you do? Well, the natural human thing is to panic and freak out. But look at what Moses says to the people. In verse 13, he says, Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. He says, stand still, watch, and stay calm. I wonder how many of you, us in the room, just need to hear that in our season of life. We're trying to control so much. Life is coming at us in so many different ways. But I wonder if God is just speaking to you tonight. Just stop moving. Watch what I'm going to do and stay calm. But I can't blame the Israelites in this scenario by freaking out because it's just the natural thing that humans do. It's the natural thing that we do when we hear news that we don't like. When we hear of a family member that gets sick. When we find out that we didn't get the job that we applied for, or we didn't get into the school that we thought we were going to, or the relationship that we thought was going to work out didn't end up working out. We get into these moments and we start to freak out. We're like, what are we going to do? Anxiety builds inside of your stomach and your chest, and you're like, what do I do with this? And fear starts to sit in because that's our natural default. But what I learned here and what we're going to talk about tonight is that trusting God doesn't come naturally. It's always a choice. When it comes to us going through life and going through pain and going through anxiety and fear, our natural is not to choose God. Our natural is to choose fear. But my friends, my job tonight is to convince you that when you trust God, your life will look completely different than if you didn't. But it has to be a choice. So, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5 things through the rest of the story that we're going to see. When you trust God, he does this. So the first thing that we're going to see, when you trust God, he brings calmness in chaos. When you trust God, he brings calmness in chaos. And you may be sitting here and you're like, I understand. Like, trusting God, I get it. Like, I trust God. Like, obviously, like, he saved me and I trust him. But do you trust him with, like, the little stuff? Like, do you trust him enough that when you wake up from your bed in the morning, that he really is going to take care of that meeting that you're worried about? Like, do you trust him enough that the things that worrying you today really aren't going to worry you in a year or in a month? Do you trust him with those parts of life that seem insignificant but really aren't? When you trust God, he brings calmness in chaos. We see this because as soon as God says this through Moses, just be still, watch, and stay calm, God starts to act something out. So it seems that the people of Israel are like, okay, we're going to do that, and watch what God does. In verse 15, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. I love how sassy God is. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. To me, it's so funny because God, it's in these moments like this that I'm like, sometimes, I don't know this, but God's so sassy that I can for sure say that women are made in God's image. Like, the sass that comes from God in this sentence is unreal. He's like, why are you crying? Just move, get out of here. I love it. He says, divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, again strengthen them in the choice they've already made, and they will charge in after the Israelites. Why is he doing it? My great glory will be displayed through the Pharaoh and his troops, his chariots, and his charioteers. Interesting that sometimes God uses the things of evil for good. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory and know that I am the Lord. Verse 19, then the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, that's pretty dope, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and Israelite camps. As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and Israelites did not approach each other all night. In chapter 13, God gives them this really cool thing where during the day, there's this pillar of cloud that leads the people, which is so dope. And then at night, it turns to fire. And now what is happening here, if you see it, is the Egyptian forces have completely surrounded the Israelites. This wasn't just like a few of Pharaoh's soldiers. What did it say? All. Egypt was the most dominant force in the world. They were if Pharaoh was a man, he was him. Like, that's Pharaoh. He had it all. All the forces of Pharaoh are surrounding the people of Israel. So if I'm going to go back in the head of that Israeli man, I'm going to think, man, if we just would have gone the other way, like if we just would have done this or we just would have done this, we wouldn't have ended up here. Like we wouldn't have ended up in this scenario. Maybe we would have fought some people, but maybe we would have won and we would have made it out. But now we're here. We're completely surrounded. And how does God answer this man's distress? He says, even though it looks like you're surrounded by your enemy, you're actually surrounded by me. He takes the angel of the Lord and puts it in between the Egyptians and his people. He takes a cloud in a pillar of cloud and fire and moves it from the front, leading them now to surround them and protect them. We have so many things in life that oftentimes make us feel like we are breaking. I don't know if you've walked through a season or are currently walking through a season, but in my experience, you will. And in moments, you feel like the whole world is caving in on you, and you feel like you can't get out. You feel like you're surrounded. I have good news for you. When you feel like you're surrounded by your fear and by your anxiety and your stress and your worry, the person surrounding you closer is God, your Lord and your Savior. When you trust God, He surrounds and protects you. There's this beautiful verse in 2 Corinthians in chapter 4, 8 and 9. And it's Paul, and he's talking to the church of Corinth, and they had gone through a crazy amount of persecution, and they had a lot of things to work through, and they were a lot like our American church, but they were in this moment where they were being persecuted, and Paul writes to them, and he says something so encouraging, and he says, even though you're going through persecution, you have this treasure in jars of clay that if you were to utilize it, it is an absolute opportunity of blessing. And look what he says to them right after that in verse 8. He says, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. When we get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. When you trust God and not the fear that surrounds you, God protects you. God surrounds you. In verse 21, the story continues. Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. This to me is really I'm going to say this as a person who reads the Bible and teaches it. This is really annoying to me because this is only 2 verses of detail. I really would like to hear more. Like, how really did this happen? How incredible would it be to be like, and then this happened, and then the shark was like on the side of the wall and like pacing back and forth. Like, how cool would it be to hear every intricate detail of this, which kind of makes me annoyed. But if you understand what happened here, God parted a sea for 2 million people. That's not just like going to the Salt River and like stacking your tubes and like making sure no one can get through. This is like, homie said, part. And from west to east, it was gone. How do you lead 2 million people through water? It's incredible. And then wind blows and it goes to dry ground. I could go on forever. It'd just be so cool. I think I'm more so jealous that I didn't get to see it in person. But it'd be so incredible. But what I want us to see is even though it's crazy, it's not. Because that's just what God does. God is in the business of making ways for his people. God, that is what he does. When you trust God, he is a miracle working God. He works wonders. He always keeps his promises. He's always the light in the darkness. Nothing is impossible for him. So you say, wow, he parted seas, that's crazy, but it's not. Because he's God. So when you are in your life walking through things that you think you'll never be able to get out of, situations, relationships, jobs, I don't know what it is, but if you think you can't get out, our God is in the business of making ways for his people. And you don't have to worry. But I think what happens sometimes is he might make a way, but it still feels like the door is open. And that's okay, because even here, the Egyptians weren't gone yet. They still felt some pressure. So let's see in verse 23. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers. Again, everybody. And I really think Moses is making a point when he's writing this. All of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers. He's going to get to that here in a little bit. Chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces into a total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. This is like a really dumb thing that just hit my head, but if you've ever played Mario Kart and your wheels like twist and you can like actually drive on those surfaces that are like above you, that's like the coolest part of the game. You've obviously never played Mario Kart, and I'll just get back to the story. In this scenario, that doesn't happen. Their wheels twist and they get stuck, and they have nowhere else to go. And it's so funny that the writer in Moses says this, that they get confused. But it's funny, for the first time, they actually understand. They're confused, but they actually understand. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. And what I love about this is, I think sometimes we think God, we hear songs, and it's like God is fighting for you, and you're like, you might even believe that God is fighting for you, but you're like, but he's like all the way in heaven. He's like, he's up there. He's not like here with me. I want to go back through and read this. It says, the text says, he was watching from where? Looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud. So where was God sitting with his people? Right there with them. He was not far away. He was not distant, like we feel like he is sometimes. He was right there. And sometimes we feel like God's silence means his absence. But just because God might be silent, or you might not see him, doesn't mean he's not working. Up until this point, the Israelite people have been so freaked out, been so stressed. What in the world is happening? What are we going to do? We're walking on a dry waterbed, and I've got fish looking at me weird from the walls. I don't know what's going on. But for some reason, God is sitting here with me. And I don't know who else needs to hear this, but I needed to hear that this week. That in everything that I go through, in every season, in every circumstance, God's in it with you. And for those of you who are saved, he's not only in it with you, he lives within you. He's closer than your skin. He walks through life with you like no other person can. What's incredible about this is it tells me that God is present in our pain. He could not be closer. And it tells me that when you trust God, he fights for you. When you trust God, he fights for you. It continues in verse 26. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, "Raise your hand over the sea again. Then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers." So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. Of all the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. And truly, it's actually a really sad ending for the Egyptians. As we've been walking through this sermon series, if you've been here, you've seen that the Egyptians have pretty much had chance after chance after chance after chance to say, okay, God, we see what you're doing. We don't want to be on the other side of this. But now they end up, not a single one survived. Ironically enough, though, really this is where I think our story really starts to connect with where we are now. Before a relationship with Jesus, we end up in no better place than the Egyptians. We are in no better spot than floating after being flooded. And I think one reason why is that when Egypt is considered in the Bible, when places like Egypt and Babylon, they always mean the world. They always mean evil. They always mean sin. And when we have sin in our lives, it's just like how the Egyptian people were kept captive or the Israelite people were kept captive in Egypt. That is what sin does to us in our lives. Sin keeps us captive. We can't be free of it. Ironically enough, we are either able to walk through or we are devoured by it. But we are only taken from one side to the other by God. When it comes to our sin, we have to confess it to God. And we have the opportunity now to live and to make a choice to follow Jesus, to accept his free gift of salvation that we couldn't earn or deserve, that his death, burial, and resurrection bring us life. And you can receive that today when you call on the name of the Lord and believe that he really did everything that he did in the Old Testament for you today. He didn't just make way for the Egyptian or the Israelite people just so you can hear a cool story. He's doing that, and he does that to show you that's what he wants to do for you. How does this story end? In verse 29, "But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground. As the water stood up like a wall on both sides, that is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians that day. The Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the shore. And when the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant, Moses." They were finally free. If I step back into the mind of the Israeli man, and now I'm on the other side of where I was before. I had God surrounding me, and now I walked through the water, and I'm just like, wow, like we're here, and I look from like above on the hill as the water is just filling up and floating with the bodies of these dead Egyptians, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? And I talk to my family, and I'm like, can you believe what just happened? Like my friends and my kids, it's like, what in the world is going on? Like, did we really just witness that? And I go down closer to the water, and I could just imagine sitting there and seeing all the carnage, but then looking up to heaven and thinking, I'm so thankful that wasn't me. I'm so thankful that wasn't me. And the only reason that wasn't me was because I trusted you. I followed you. And in the midst of all of this brutality in a horrible scene, this man's able to look up and say, I will tell my family about this for generations. I will never let my family forget when you really delivered us, when you really saved us. This was the Israelites' testimony. And what I love about the very end of this passage is a word that we don't always get to talk about, but it's this word, awe. When the Israelites saw the mighty power of the Lord, they were filled with awe. You know that word, awesome? That word is just saying that that thing is filled with awe. I have awe looking at that. So maybe some of you need to stop saying awesome to certain things. But awe is just this idea of it's incredible. It's wonderful. I can't even wrap my mind around it. It's awe. And the people of Israel walk through water. They see all of this happen. And the only response that they have is just, wow, thank you. I can't even imagine. Because I think what the Israelite people got to finally see that they hadn't seen for so long was they finally just got to see who God really was. He was their Father. He was their Redeemer. He was their Savior. He was the one who will work miracles for them. He's the one that will save them out of their situations when they trust him. He was reminding them of who he is. And that's one of the last things we see. When you trust God, he reminds you of who he is. So frequently, we walk through life worrying and fearing about things that if we would just remember who God is, we would not worry about it as much. I think of scenarios in my life where, man, I'm afraid that this is going to happen. Like I don't really know if I make this decision or I go down this road, what in the world is going to happen? And sometimes you're so afraid you don't even do it. I don't know where you're at, but I know all of us have some sense of fear, something that makes us afraid. My ask of you today is to think about this question in your head. If the God that can make a way through a Red Sea, can he make a way for me? If God can provide a way for them, can he provide a way for me? Absolutely he can. Because he will always remind you of who he is. Before I could actually do anything, my dad went back for a third swing. I'd already gone through two, but before I could react to him telling me, don't get out of the way, be ready, he was going back for a third swing. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But he goes back and he cranks the baseball. And I'm, again, 5 years old. I'm like, I guess I gotta get it. So I'm like, get down in my stance, and I don't even really have time to think. And I remember just popping up like that. I was like, I don't know what happened. Did it go into my glove? Is people laughing at me? Did it go by me? I had no idea. And then I looked, and the ball was there. Have you ever seen Meet the Robinsons, and that kid just catches the ball in the outfield, and it's just I caught it. That was me. I was like, what? It actually happened. I was like, I did it. And I looked at my dad, and he just smiled at me. He gave me a thumbs up. And I threw it back to the other dad, and I waddled back to the back of the line, because that's what you do when you're 5. You can't really walk yet. You're just waddling. And I get to the back of the line, and we keep going through it. At the end of practice, my dad's taking me home, and I remember we stopped at Sonic. And my dad, for some reason, we had this affinity with Sonic because they had this drink called an ocean water. And if you've ever had an ocean water, it's the best drink in the world. It's like Powerade and Sprite mixed together, which probably gives you cancer, but whatever. It was great. It was great when I was 5. Maybe that it tells me probably a lot more about myself now. But we were sitting in the car, and I remember just drinking this drink in the parking lot. And my dad turned around, and he just looked at me. And he was like, Hunter, did I scare you? I was like, yeah, you scared me. He's like, I never would ever mean to do that on purpose. Like, yeah, I know that, Dad. He's like, do you know who I am? I'm like, yes, I know who you are. He's like, I'm your dad. I will only ever protect you. I will only ever care for you. I will only ever love you. I think sometimes we forget who our Father is. My dad reminded me of who my dad was to me in that car. He said, I'm your father. I'm only going to take care of you. Sometimes you just need a reminder of how good God is. The same God that parted seas for the Israelite people, is the same God today. Same God that sat with them as they were walking through and twisted the wheels of the Egyptians. It's the same God that's walking through your problems today. There is so much going on in our world and in our culture and things that take our mind off of who God is. But maybe you just need a reminder. Because when you trust him, he brings you calmness in chaos. He surrounds you and protects you. He makes a way for you. He fights for you. And he will remind you of who he is. And here in a moment, we have an awesome opportunity to really just be reminded of who he is. We do this on the last Thursday of every month, but we're going to take communion. We have 4 stations all around. And what this is it's not some crazy just ceremony that Christians do. It's a moment to pause and reflect on who our Savior is. Because when we put ourselves in this scenario of fear and anxiety and shame, we can so easily forget the one who is leading us and who is in front of us. And when Jesus was about to take on the cross, he went and had his last meal with his disciples, and he broke bread, symbolizing that his body would be broken, and he took wine and he poured it out, and saying that my blood will be spilled for you. And we were supposed to do this in remembrance. And there's one requirement before communion that I just absolutely love that is in Scripture. And it's to take a moment and reflect. It's to take a moment and really think about, where are you? Or where are you in your relationship with God? It's a moment for you to talk to God and for God to tell you or ask you, where are you? Come home to me. I'm here for you. I'm ready to embrace a relationship with you. Do you remember who I am? Some of you in the room just need to remember that God is your Father. And unlike any earthly father that fails, he's your heavenly Father that never does. I want to give some of you an opportunity in the room tonight. I really believe that when we confess with our mouth and believe in our heart that Jesus is Lord, he does save us. And he does reveal a life beyond our wildest dreams. And what I want to do for some of you tonight is I want you to be able to have that moment. If you've never ever put your faith fully in Jesus, and you've never fully understood the depth of your sin, in that it took him to a cross that you deserved, but he took it for you. And 3 days later, he rose, and now you get to have life because of it. If you have never made that decision, I want you to be able to do that tonight. So what I want to do is, I want to pray. And if that's you, I want you to join me. And say this in your own words. And as I'm praying, for those of you who have given your life to Jesus, would you just pray and talk to God for a moment about where you're at? Maybe you need to be reminded of the moment that you gave your life to Jesus. I wonder how that would make you feel and think and put you back in that situation of awe of God. So if you've never made that decision and you want to, I want you to follow me in prayer. Let's pray. God, I know I'm a sinner. I know that I don't deserve your grace, but you are giving it to me. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for sending your son to die on a cross for me. Thank you that you didn't stay dead, but you rose so that I might have life and life to the full. God, you are so good. You are my God. Thank you for saving your people. Thank you for saving me. God, I trust you. Help me not to trust my fear. Help me not to worry. Help me to trust you. Lord, in your name I pray. Amen. And with every head bowed and every eye closed still, if you made that decision tonight, would you just raise your hand? Would you raise your hand and let me know? Let the people know. I see you. Lord, for the rest of us in this room, would you just be with us? God, we need you. Lord, help us reflect on these moments. God, would you just fill our lives and our hearts with trust in you, that God, we don't know where our future is going, but God, it's not fear, it's you. God, you have us wrapped in your arms. God, you are our good Father who will take care of us. God, would you be with us tonight as we remember who you are in your sacrifice? Amen. At this time, what I'd love for you to do, if you still need some time to sit and reflect, go for it. Ian's going to lead us in a song as we go through communion. But when you are ready, head to any of the 4 stations around. Feel free to spread around the room. Take it. This is for you. This is a moment for you and God to just reflect and have a moment. Love you guys.